Hey folks, let's talk about natal Sun square Saturn. So first of all, what does the Sun do when it's in aspect to a planet? The Sun in aspect to a planet sort of co-opts that planet so that that planet becomes part of the basic holistic expression of the personality. That planet's energy is going to be a core feature of the personality across the board. It's the solar function here we're talking about. So the Sun is going to definitely add energy to and invigorate the expression of that planet within the personality structure. So the Sun is very enlivening in terms of what it does in aspect, and it renders a planet important by virtue of being in aspect to it. So in terms of natal Sun squaring up with Saturn, this corresponds to the archetypal relationship between Leo and Capricorn. The first step in terms of assessing an aspect is it's always good to go back to, well, what is the archetypal relationship at play here? And when we do that, we are referring to the natural zodiacal wheel. So we know that the Sun governs Leo and Saturn governs Capricorn. So we're dealing with the archetypal relationship between Leo and Capricorn. And of course, this is the archetypal relationship of an inconjunct. So it is 150 degrees that we're considering. What does that aspect kind of mean? Yeah, so we have a sort of fundamental tension in terms of what the inconjunct means. We have a fundamental tension between the motives and drives of the Sun Leo matrix and the motives and drives of the Saturn Capricorn matrix. They really have nothing in common, as the quincunx or inconjunct suggests. So they have very little in common in terms of what these matrices, Sun Leo, Saturn Capricorn, represent as psychological drives. Leo is the inner child, right? And Saturn Capricorn is the responsible adult. So Leo wants to play, but Saturn Capricorn wants rules and wants an order established. So that's the sort of archetypal relationship that we're in question here between Leo and Capricorn. So we refer, of course, to the zodiac to let us know what the archetypal relationship, but we're dealing with a square. So what does it mean when a square is under consideration? Yeah. The square in this instant is going to definitely amplify or reinforce the archetypal, the already existing archetypal tension between the Sun Leo matrix and the Saturn Capricorn matrix. So it means that there is a way in which, with the square present, that the Sun and Saturn can be resisting each other. Okay. All right. So I've spoken about this before in terms of the differences between opening squares and closing squares. Opening squares have a subtone, a Cancerian subtone. Why? Because Cancer represents the opening square of the zodiac, the first 90 degree angle from the Aries 0 point. So opening squares in general, regardless of what signs are involved, they have a Cancerian sort of subtone. And in terms of considering the Sun square Saturn, there is a sort of inhibition here that the opening square kind of adds on to the suggestion already of inhibition in terms of Saturn. What does Saturn do to the Sun? With Sun square Saturn, we have the solar self-expression inhibited in some way or shut down in some way. And we can often trace this to the childhood experience where we felt rejected for our self-expression, that if we expressed ourselves naturally and spontaneously, that it was not well received, especially by a primary caregiver. So there is this inhibition of the solar function, a kind of crisis of confidence, self-doubt, heightened awareness of failure, not feeling good enough for who and what we are. So Sun Saturn there. So I'm saying that in terms of opening squares with Sun Saturn, they will have this, they often do have this Cancerian subtone in terms of feelings, inhibited feelings, feelings of rejection in some kind of way. But already the planets in this aspect, Sun and Saturn, when they come together, there is this suggestion. The Saturnian energy will tend to want to, in some kind of way, block or inhibit the solar energy. Okay, so there's a kind of double emphasis there. With closing squares, we say that closing squares have the subtone of Capricorn, because Capricorn represents the closing, the final 90 degrees of the zodiac in terms of it's the distance from the Aries 0 point. So in terms of considering this with Sun and Saturn, there can be really extremely heightened needs for achievement and tangible accomplishment. So one part of that Sun-Saturn square is extremely heightened needs for achievement and tangible accomplishment. We work hard and we are diligent and focused because on some level we are motivated from a place of fear of failure, especially in terms of living up to the standards of a parent or living up to the standards of the social conditioning that we would have internalized. So there's a kind of fear of failure in terms of, well, I'm not meeting up to what the parent wants or not meeting up to what the social conditioning is expecting of me or demanding of me. I've internalized the social conditioning, and that is the basis for my fear. So with that, we become very responsive to whatever authority we have in our mind, the parent, the society. We respond to that felt internal pressure to live in accordance with the standards dictated by these perceived authorities. So the Saturnian pressure on the solar function, I have to act in accordance with the pressure put upon me by the society, by parents, or whoever is perceived to be in authority. Now, in terms of, another way in which the Sun-Saturn dynamic can play out, the Sun-Saturn square, we can reject Saturnian quality. So we resist. The Sun is now resisting hard work, diligence, responsibility. So what happens is that Saturnian needs build up in the psyche as they have been resisted and ignored in favor of feeling and feeding the Sun Leo side of us. So we stay in the Sun Leo energy of wanting to play, to have fun, to enjoy ourselves, and we might procrastinate when it comes to anything Saturnian, work and responsibility. So the Saturnian needs build up in the psyche because we have been ignoring them, and then we overcompensate by overworking so that we don't feel inadequate or like a failure. So what happens in this instant is that because we have, let's say, resisted Saturn and rejected Saturn, we often meet Saturn now externally as, let's say, a very demanding boss, or in the form of deadlines that force us to interface with the Saturnian side that we have been resisting. So that's one aspect or one facet, let's say, of the Sun square Saturn aspect, that there can be this rejection of Saturnian qualities, that we resist Saturn. On the other hand, though, if we identify more with Saturn, we could be resisting the Sun Leo side, the Sun side, the solar side gets resisted now. So in this way, or in this configuration, let's say, we favor work over play. We are suspicious of fun and enjoyment, and we can't let our hair down and do the things that the Sun wants to do, enjoy life. Feel good, vitality, play, fun. So what happens is that the solar needs accumulate. They build up in our psyche as they are unmet. Yeah. So when the Sun or the solar needs are finally allowed to come to the surface, what happens is that we may overdo our Sun side. We may kind of, sort of overcompensate by going over the top to gain approval and recognition. So because we have ignored the solar urge to be naturally and joyfully, to be appreciated for what we are in moments of fun and enjoyment, we go overboard in terms of seeking approval and recognition. Solar needs are approval, recognition, validation. So an example could be that we're at a party and we can't stop talking about ourselves, but we find that because of our overcompensation, that perhaps in our overcompensation that we're not really well received by others. We are rejected in the Saturnian sense by other people because they find us to be, let's say, attention seeking. So what happens is that there is a rejection of the solar side, a resistance of the solar side, and those solar needs to be recognized, appreciated, valued, they build up in the psyche, and then we overcompensate, we overdo the sun, we are attention seeking, and that what happens is that we now meet rejection, the Saturnian rejection that we're so kind of afraid of. We meet that rejection in the form of other people. So there's a kind of playing out in real physical terms of the Sun-Saturn dynamic. Now, of course, Sun-Saturn can be more integrated. Sun-Square Saturn can be more integrated. And, you know, it speaks to the work that is done to bring about a more mature, strong sense of self-worth, a more mature self-expression rather, strong sense of self-worth, good sense of boundaries, and strong organizational skills. So with Sun square Saturn in a more integrated expression, there is an aptitude for diligence and focus, but that these Saturnian, let's say, gifts or talents, they do come about through having to work to bring these two parts of the psyche together. Sun and Saturn need to be brought together, and we reap the rewards when we have learned to integrate the two of them. So integration normally comes after work is done within the personality. So we buttress our own sense of self-esteem after rejection from others. We get to a place where we recognize that we have to be the person that likes ourselves first. So an integrated expression of Sun Saturn is that we are not so dependent on other people for external validation of the self. So what happens is that with this aspect, rejection, Saturnian rejection can definitely act as a sort of evolutionary catalyst in terms of, you know, helping us to become better people. And it forces us to know, well, do I like me? Do I like myself? And it forces us to really come from a sort of a healthy, strong sense of self-worth in terms of working through the rejection and deciding for ourselves that what matters is how much we like ourselves. With Sun square Saturn, we can also be quite risk averse, very conservative, almost too conservative, in that there is a fear of life, a fear of meeting life, in terms of approaching life with confidence and faith. There needs to be more balance there, and the Sun Saturn square could represent that. We have designed for ourselves a curriculum of learning to take some more risks in self-expression so that the personality can be brought into more balance. On the other hand, with Sun square Saturn, we can be overconfident and we resist the Saturnian impulse for limits, practicality, and common sense. So we would need to incorporate more of the Saturnian attributes in order to bring the personality into greater balance. Yeah. So the other thing with Sun square Saturn is that we have to watch our tendencies to be too exacting, to have impossible standards that are incapable of being met, because no one can meet up to our standards, or, you know, rise up to our standards to meet our standards. We may find ourselves feeling quite lonely in our perceived excellence. Yeah, so we could find that unintegrated Sun Saturn square means that we are rigidly controlling and authoritarian, that we push people away, in turn reinforcing inner feelings of low self-esteem when we are not accepted by others, when other people reject us. So remember that the Sun needs acceptance, recognition, and healthy validation. So when we have overdone Saturn, we are interfering with the capacity of the Sun to feed its psychological needs. Yeah, so that can happen with the square. Now, on the other hand, we can find that we are interacting with people who act in rigidly controlling or authoritarian ways in respect to us. So we are receiving that energy from someone else. Instead of it being us who is the controlling and authoritarian one, we are encountering that energy from other people. So, and it shuts down our solar function, our solar self-expression. So we allow ourselves to be controlled, and we are responsive to the imposition of someone else's authority. Someone else's authority becomes so important and almost shuts down how we express ourselves naturally. So we need to, first of all, with this dynamic that the square can certainly indicate, we need to own the Saturnian parts of ourselves, not resist them, and therefore, in a sense, kind of, let's say, nullify the need for external figures to play the role of Saturn. So we need Saturn's help in assisting us with the process of having a well-defined, healthy ego, a strong inner sense of self, so that we're not undermined by external individuals to whom we have given away our power and authority. Yeah, so that's another part, one more dynamic of the Sun square Saturn aspect. Now, Sun square Saturn can also indicate where we have worked hard, or we are working hard to diligently master some creative talent. It's the pianist who practices 8 hours for the day. Saturn helps the person in that instant to harness and focus his or her creativity. That's the Sun. So the square now represents the work that needs to be done in order to reach an excellence of creative self-expression. One more integrated expression of the Sun square Saturn, definitely cultivated through work, is that the person has a penchant for handling responsibility, and they may kind of seem more mature than their years would suggest, because perhaps they had a responsibility thrust on them early on in their lives. Yeah, that they had to be, some external force made them have to integrate and incorporate and absorb the qualities of Saturn into their solar way of being. I have to be responsible. I'm in charge of something. Yeah. Then, on the other hand, we have the person who continually runs from Saturn, the person who is afraid of aging, Sun square Saturn, the person resisting the Saturnian process of aging, where the person is afraid of growing up, afraid of accepting the cycles of life and the cycles of being in a physical body, which are ruled by Saturn. So those are a few dimensions of the Sun-Saturn aspect that you can think about Sun square Saturn. Remember that when you are assessing any aspect, it's very useful and helpful to think about, well, what is the archetypal relationship suggested by the zodiac? Yeah. And then you consider what the actual aspect is and what does that add to the picture. Then you think about, well, what beliefs and experiences may I have if I have the aspect, or someone in general? What could they perceive, what could they believe, what could be some of their experiences personally with that aspect. So also remember too that not all squares are equal, that there's various reasons for that, including whether it's an opening square or closing square. Also that people identify with different parts of their psyche more or less. So you can't know by looking at the chart alone if someone identifies more with their Saturnian side or with their solar side. Yes, the chart will give us an emphasis and perhaps suggest something, but it's always good to talk to someone and figure out, well, how is this playing out in their lives, and how do they personally identify through their beliefs or attitudes what they say. All right, so that's just really helpful there. So if you'd like to work with me one-to-one, I do offer counseling consultations, and you can find out more about those by going in the description box below, where there are links to my website. Thank you so much guys for watching. Hope this was helpful, and talk soon again. Bye.